Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
The Kwacha turns 19. The birthday we've all been dreading. By Munyumba Mutwale. Confidence, not paper or digital money, is the key currency of any capitalist system. End of quote. Mal Fletcher, Australian futurist and social media commentator. A few days ago on August 20th, it was my mother's birthday. And like all birthdays, it was a day of joy, cake and laughter. All to celebrate the life and journey of a wonderful woman who meant a lot in our lives. That is the beauty of birthdays. They always seem to be the happiest day in the world. I guess that's why we put the word happy before the word birthday. Once I got back to my desk to close out the day and run my daily market analytics, I saw another birthday coming, and oh boy, was this one not a happy one. You see, yesterday was the day the Kwacha turned 19. Now, this birthday was not a day of joyous celebration, but rather a day of doom, gloom and despair, because deep down we all know that 19 was the final barrier between the simplicity of childhood and the rapid growth of adulthood, also known as your 20s. Anyone above the age of 30 knows that once you pass 20, it's like the years fly by so fast. Now, I'm 33, and turning 20 felt like it was just yesterday, but being 7 felt like it was such a long time ago. The same phenomena seems present in the world of currencies. It appears the more they age, or devalue, the faster they age, or devalue. Currencies are oddly like children. You want them to stay 5 years old and innocent forever, because you know the older they get, the more complex they become. Yes, in March 2020, the Kwacha did trade at 19. But at that time it just reached 19 in a quick and rapid devaluation, which was easily reversed. But this time it has now settled at 19 in a slow and steady depreciation, meaning backtracking would be very difficult, because this represents a market consensus of the Kwacha's value. Let me take you back, about 10 years ago, in 2010, at that time, the Zambian Kwacha was trading at an exchange rate of 4 Kwacha and 75 ngwe. Yes, it's true, at the beginning of 2010, the Zambian Kwacha was an under 5. During the decade, the Kwacha had experienced its first minor devaluation of the period, that was back in 2013. Then, came another more significant devaluation, which took place during the period of 2014 to 15, and then finally, since 2018, it has been on a sustained devaluation path. All this has been mainly driven by a decline in confidence in the Zambian economy. This decline came from the fact that the source of geosynchronous global growth, geosynchronous, is just a fancy way of saying most of the economies of the world are growing at the same time, and Zambian economic growth, that being China was starting to run out of gas, and with no economic growth source of its own, Zambia's future was uncertain, and the currency was just reflecting that. You see, currencies are funny, in that, people run so many technical and intense quantitative models to try and predict their movements. However, to quote former CEO of Credit Suisse, Tidjane Thiam, a currency is nothing but the reflection of economic growth, or the prospects of economic growth of a country. It simply acts, moves, and behaves almost like a listed company share price, and is driven, in the long run, by prevailing and consensus sentiments of growth. End of quote. For all the eloquent blabbering we economists love doing, currency valuation is a very simple thing. We just like the sound of our own voices, and really enjoy sounding like the smartest people in the room. That's why we add all that jargon and gobbledygook. The value and direction of a currency is simply derived from the amount of local economic activity in a country. The more local economic activity there is in a country, the more local transactions are needed to facilitate that level of local economic activity. The more local transactions are done, the more a medium of exchange, namely the local currency, is needed for the facilitation of those local transactions, and voila, that's the demand for more of the local currency and how it appreciates. Simply put, the faster your economy grows, the more money you are going to need, and therefore, your currency appreciates, and that's it. So, here's a quick Zambian economic history lesson. If one goes back to the early 2000s, you will discover that Zambia was one of the first African countries to establish bilateral economic relations with China under the administration of the late President Munyumba, and this immediately reflected in our economic growth prospects. This in turn was the actual source of the booming 2000s, or the golden Munyumba era, as we all would like to remember it. That age of prosperity was more because since 2002, the Zambian economy was chained to the Chinese economy, and China was experiencing rapid economic growth acceleration from 1999 up until the Great Recession of 2008. During this period, things were going so good for Zambia that the Kwacha even experienced sustained appreciation between the years of 2004 and 2008, where the Kwacha moved from 4.8 to 3.7 respectively. Yes, you heard me correctly. I said the Kwacha actually appreciated. I know, it almost seems impossible given your experience over the last 10 years. But this actually happened, once upon a time. However, when 2008 came, it appeared the party was over, and with the end of Chinese economic acceleration, so too came the end of Zambian economic acceleration and currency stability. Since 2008 we have entered into the age of devaluation, and we have never stopped, and just like that, all the confidence behind the Kwacha slowly vanished. As Chinese economic growth declined from its 2007 peak of 14%, simply because China had just run out of growth, so too did the Zambian economy. As the Zambian economy declined, the currency devalued. So with growth already on a downward trajectory, it appears a combination of load shedding and droughts further weakened us, and finally, the coronavirus just came to finish us off. However, the key underlying factor has always been that the Zambian economy has never gone through a period where it has created its own economic growth internally and organically. As much as we like to link the prosperity of the 2000s to the late President Munyumba's policies, who did, in all honesty, do a remarkable job on the economic stabilization side of the equation, it was mostly a combination of China-driven geosynchronous growth, oh boy, there goes that word geosynchronous again, and Chinese trade and investment in Zambia that did most of the heavy lifting. In reality, no Zambian administration has ever managed to work out the endogenous growth side of the Zambian economy. All the administrations of both past and present have only worked on the strategy of making Zambia conducive to receiving or experiencing the benefits of externally driven growth, but have never managed to crack the code of making the Zambian economy generate its own economic growth through the rise of booming local enterprises. Now, the period of 2010 to 2020 has simply given the people of Zambia a look at what's underneath the hood of the economy, and guess what? There was no engine in the car this whole time. Our economy has been like a car being towed this whole time, and when I say this whole time I mean since 1964, and the tow truck has either been the global economy, a specific trade and investment partner, such as China, or the government. However, from 2010 to now, our government has since maxed out on credit, and the global economy, along with China, has slowed down to such a grinding halt that there has been no economic force remaining to pull us forward. But in this whole picture, there has never been a period where Zambia has been a purely local entrepreneur-driven economy to give global capital confidence in times where the global economy is not there to prop up the Zambian economy. All this can be seen in last year's quarter-by-quarter economic growth figures, in which the Zambian economy moved from 2.3% in the first quarter to almost no growth of 0.2% in the fourth quarter. So even without the coronavirus slowdown, we were heading for a recession. All the coronavirus did was give the economy an added nudge down the mountain it was already fiercely tumbling down, thus accelerating the process and exaggerating the immediate impact. Now, I am going to have to be brutally honest with you. The Kwacha hitting 20 is inevitable, and now it's really about what we do after that, which will make the real difference. It's this decision that will determine whether we go into free fall or whether we rein it in, and avoid repeating the depression of the 80s and 90s. And yes, we are in the exact same set of circumstances that led to the economic downturn that introduced the Zambian depression that lasted until 2002. There was a global recession in the 80s, there is a global recession now, which mind you was already coming with or without the coronavirus. There was a declining Kwacha in the 80s, and there is a declining Kwacha now. There was rising inflation in the 80s, and there is rising inflation now. There was growing unemployment in the 80s, and there is growing unemployment now, which has been growing for the larger part of the last decade. There was expanding and unsustainable public debt in the 80s, and there is expanding and unsustainable public debt now. For all intents and purposes, it appears we have brought the 80s back. So we are now at a crossroads, and we have a choice to make. We can either sit here cosmetically prettying our economy up, while singing Bob Marley's "I Don't Wanna Wait" in vain, waiting indefinitely for the next rising global economic superstar, better known as a blesser, to come along and allow us to hitch a ride on its economic acceleration wave, a strategy, by the way, we have proudly been using since 2002, or we can finally decide to take control of our economy and start learning as a country how to create economic growth for ourselves by ourselves. We can choose to learn the hard lesson that an economy cannot sustain growth through a series of exogenous shock factors, but it can only do it through the growth and efforts of its own organic private enterprises. We have to recognize how unsustainable it is to run an economy like a car with a faulty battery that needs to be jump-started every single time the world has a slowdown, and there we are stuck, looking for someone with jumper cables to help us out. We have to make the tough decision to finally end all reliance on the outside world. That would mean no more touring of all the nations of the world in search of FDI like Beyoncé on tour with a new album, like we have been doing for the past 3 decades. We have to decide that we are no longer going country to country with a begging bowl asking for aid and assistance, like we have been doing for the past 3 decades. Most importantly, and I cannot emphasize this point anymore, we definitely must put an end to any and all reliance on external debt. Zambia has to behave as if the world has closed every door and avenue indefinitely, and dig deep within itself to find its own organic sources of private sector growth, namely from the innovations and enterprises of the people. Everything, and I mean absolutely everything, every product, every input, every service, every supply chain, every innovation, you name it, has to start coming from within, and has to come from Zambia's people. That's if we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the 1980s, and the depression that came after. And make no mistake, the Kwacha heading for its 20th birthday is just one of many warning signals of an imminent economic threat, and the next 2 decades of the Zambian economy are hanging in the balance of the decisions we make now.